Let's move on to, is Tua out of Miami? Man, I think this is a really loaded question because you look at the comments that were made by Hafley on the Jim Rose show, and when you take those comments and the way that John Eric Sullivan and Hafley kind of have danced around the situation, you would think he's on his way out, and by not addressing it now, the further and further it gets, it looks like Tua is ultimately going on his way out. But then there's the contract situation. So let's break this all down here. The comments by Hafley, and this is what he said, quote by quote, "There will be competition. I've spoken to Tua about a lot of things, but ultimately this will come down to who we believe gives us the best chance to win, to start this new era and build a foundation with us." Now, he spoke to Tua, so that's different than the last time when he's been answering this question. He's actually had a conversation with Tua. They've had an actual discussion, multiple discussions. So ultimately, by that, it sounds like he's going to be able to compete and have a chance at the starting job. But when Hafley had on who has final say on starters and players, this is what he said. "When it's final say on who is going to play, that's myself and the staff. When it's final say on picking a player, that's going to be him and his staff." So what he's referencing to is when it comes to who's playing, it's going to be Hafley and his staff. When it comes to the decision on who's making the player on the roster, it's going to be Sullivan and his staff. Because as we know, Chris Greer gave in to Mike McDaniel way too much and the other head coaches and what their desires were instead of what overall is going to be the best. So it could be a little bit of collaborative, but at the same time, ultimately those decisions are going to rest in their departments depending on the situation. Now, to me, by the way they've been dancing around the situation, it sounds like Tua could be out of Miami. He could be staying. We don't really know. But by them not directly answering it, saying we want him back or he's going to be able to compete for the role, it sounds like he could be out. Now, here comes the tricky part about this whole thing. Is Tua's contract. And if you release him pre-June 1st, you're inquiring $99 million in dead money. Now, you could spread that out over 2 years, $44.5 million per year, right? However, Miami is in a cap situation where we're in the red. Now, we could make one decision that could get us into the green or put us even. However, if you were to release him, you take on dead money even more and make the situation even worse. But if you release him post June 1st, $67 million this year, $13.4 in 2027 and 2028. So you could do it that way as well, or you can just hang on to him for another year and try to release him in a year or two, try to maybe trade him and his value may be increased a little bit. But a $67 to $99 million issue could be the biggest difference on what the decision ultimately is made. I don't think there's really a chance to really get out of this if you're the Miami Dolphins, because you're taking on either $99 million of dead money over 2 years, or you're taking on $67 million if you release him after next year, or you release him post June 1st. So ultimately, I think the cap situation makes this decision a little more difficult, even though we should get rid of Tua because I don't think his level of play has been there. However, Bobby Slowick's comments today talked about that he believes Tua could bounce back, and I think he could as well. It just depends on the direction the way Hafley and Sullivan want to go. But ultimately, that's why the situation is tricky. But based off the comments, sounds like he could be out. However, the contract could make him be staying in Miami a little bit longer.